Let's start in London and take you to Ben Brown outside the British Parliament.
Hello from Westminster. We're at the police cordon here after this morning's incident, which they say was terror-related. Just down the road there, a vehicle, a silver Ford Fiesta, at 7:37 this morning, at the peak of the morning rush hour, collided with cyclists and then hit security barriers outside the Palace of Westminster as well. Let's just talk you through exactly what happened. It was as people were heading into work in central London. Now, the car was travelling westbound past the Houses of Parliament when it swerved across onto the other side of the road into eastbound traffic, hitting security barriers. The whole area now cordoned off, and the police say that is likely to stay that way, that lockdown, for some time. Now, several cyclists were hit. It's understood they were waiting at traffic lights at the time. 2 or 3 people were treated at the scene. One woman is still in hospital, being treated at Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital with serious but not life-threatening injuries. Now, the police are saying that they arrested a man who they say is in his late 20s. They are questioning him, they say, on suspicion of terrorism offences. But they say he's not cooperating. They're trying to establish his identity and his motivation, but he's refusing to answer their questions, and they say they haven't yet identified him, and that there's no intelligence at this time, they say, of any further danger to Londoners. The Prime Minister's already tweeted with her thoughts, saying that her thoughts are with those who were injured in this what appears to have been a terror attack this morning. She has thanked the emergency services for what she called their immediate and courageous response. As I say, a meeting of the government's Cobra Emergency Committee scheduled for 2 o'clock this afternoon, and in the meantime we've been getting an update from the Metropolitan Police Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu at New Scotland Yard.
At 7:37 a.m. a silver Ford Fiesta was involved in a collision in front of the Houses of Parliament. That vehicle collided with cyclists and pedestrians before hitting a barrier and coming to a stop. 2 people have been taken to hospital. 1 man has already been discharged, and 1 woman remains in hospital being treated for serious but thankfully non-life-threatening injuries. Another man was also treated at the scene but didn't require hospital treatment. The driver of the Fiesta, who was alone in the vehicle, was arrested at the scene by armed officers who were already nearby. The man is in his late 20s. He's been arrested on suspicion of terrorism offences and has been taken to a South London police station where he remains in custody. Given that this appears to be a deliberate act, the method, and this being an iconic site, we are treating it as a terrorist incident, and the investigation is being led by officers from the Counter-Terrorism Command. Officers are searching the vehicle and no other weapons have been found at this time. At this early stage of the investigation, no other suspects at the scene have been identified or reported to police. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK connected to this incident. Our priority now is to formally establish the identity of the suspect and establish his motivation if we can. He is not currently cooperating. However, as you would expect, detectives from the Counter-Terrorism Command are making various other urgent inquiries to ensure that there is no outstanding risk to the public.
So that's Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu talking to the press a few minutes ago. Let's talk now to Peter Kirkham, a former Detective Chief Inspector with the Metropolitan Police. Thanks for being with us. So the police are saying they've got this man, or got a man in custody. They're trying to work out exactly who he is, why he did what he did, but he's not cooperating.
Unfortunately, that's not an unusual situation with suspects detained. They don't just come in and, like they do in TV drama, just immediately admit everything so you can get it solved in an hour. They will need to identify him. That will feed in very much so, almost totally so really, into the motivation in the absence of him explaining why he did it. I think the circumstances are such that it's plain that it wasn't just an ordinary traffic accident. I think that's near enough eliminated right now. If it's deliberate, therefore, the reason is why. and obviously that can range from terrorism at the top of the tree to a road rage incident or some sort of aggravated protest at the other end of the scale.
And the other question, of course, is whether, if this was a terror-related incident, was this a lone wolf, somebody operating just on their own, or was it part of any wider conspiracy?
Well, that will be the main reason why they need to get to the bottom of who he is and what the motivation is, because obviously any further threat doesn't come from him. He's now locked up, but it would come from anyone that's associated with him or any larger organisation that he's working with. And so it's really important that they do identify him. They will identify him at some point. They've got a number of starters for 10, the vehicle itself. Fingerprints and DNA, maybe no immediate hit, but maybe there'll be some way of tracing connections abroad or something like that. But of course, there are a number of lines of inquiry that they'll follow. We've got good footage of him. They may even be getting phone calls ringing up saying who he is. If anybody does recognise him or does recognise the vehicle, then the terrorism branch would really like a call from them, 0800 789 321.
And obviously just down the road there where it happened behind us, a lot of forensic work going on right now to find out more about what happened.
Yeah, for sure. The scene is going to be examined in fine detail. The anti-terrorist branch do the same sort of scene examination as everybody else for any other type of major incident, but just to a far deeper degree. That will be evidential. It's unlikely to add anything other than anything in the vehicle that helps identify him. The wider scene is unlikely to add anything in terms of either his identity or the motivation, so it's for future use in any proceedings.
What are your instincts about what happened here? I mean, clearly it could have been so much worse. That's the initial response of a lot of people. Relief, in a sense, that this wasn't on the scale of previous terror attacks that we saw last year, including the Westminster Bridge attack. For sure. The officers that first responded to this, and we've seen footage of them arriving in 2 ARVs just within seconds of him crashing into the barrier, and with weapons drawn, then calling him out of the vehicle, getting him out of the vehicle. Sure, if you've got a firearm, then you're protected against any knife or any gun that the person might have to a certain extent. But of course that vehicle could contain explosives or anything else, and that would have been running through their minds. So you've got a situation where you've got a vehicle you want to be further away from, but you've got a suspect that you've got to be close to deal with. And so that just is straightforward bravery and courage. We've heard the Prime Minister praising the emergency services. I'm afraid they don't believe a word she says after 8 years of the way she's treated them. The bottom line is we are seeing this day in, day out with officers, not just around terrorism, but around serious crime. They are behaving extremely bravely, and they're just not being rewarded for it. And what does it say about security around the Palace of Westminster and the improvements that there have been since last year's attack here, that there was such a rapid response by those officers, but also that, you know, the security barriers clearly did their job as well?
The Palace of Westminster is probably one of the most secure places in the country, certainly in London. There are armed officers there all the time, although it was armed response vehicles that seem to be the primary sort of arrival of the armed response vehicles brought most of the armed officers to the scene today. But the barriers, yeah, they did their job. They stopped vehicles getting into premises. They are very effective in that. But of course, if you've got a vehicle with explosives in it, then if it went bang at the barriers, it's going to have just as devastating an effect as if it manages to get through.
Do you think there needs to be further improvements to security at Westminster? Some people are talking about pedestrianising the whole area, not allowing traffic anywhere near the Houses of Parliament.
It's impossible to protect against an attack. If somebody wants to attack a premises, then they will. If you protect that premises, then they'll just attack as close as they can get in. And the further you keep them away, then they're likely to have larger explosive devices. We've seen it in the green zones in places like Afghanistan, where you've got the green zone. They have really secure perimeters to that, and all that happens is they bring a big truck bomb to that security point, get as far as they can, and if they get no further, they just blow it up at that point. And so you're not going to you protect the fabric of the building, but you're not going to prevent an attack.
OK, Peter Kirkham, thank you very much for your time. Peter Kirkham there, former Detective Chief Inspector with the Metropolitan Police, giving his thoughts on what happened here at 7:37 this morning, the height of the morning rush hour, when this vehicle, a silver Ford Fiesta, relatively small vehicle, if this was a terror attack, apparently ramming into cyclists, swerving onto the other side of the road, hitting cyclists, then driving at speed, accelerating up to about 40 miles an hour, according to eyewitnesses, into those security barriers. And then the bonnet, the front of the car, completely crumpling, the airbag apparently blowing up as well. And then the armed police very quickly moving in just a few seconds later and making that arrest. And the man in his 20s, we gather, according to the police, being questioned at a police station in South London on terrorism-related suspicion of terrorism-related offences. Well, let's hear from an eyewitness who saw the events as they unfolded here outside the Palace of Westminster, Barry Williams.
Well, I heard a commotion and turned round to see a silver car heading towards the cyclists on the wrong side of the road. They were parked waiting for the lights to change. He hit the cyclist, then swerved over towards where the safety barrier is, where the police make sure cars go through, and accelerated and hit it at quite high speed.
What was your impression? Was it a deliberate act?
Well, he seemed to. I wasn't sure whether he meant to hit the cyclist. They may have just been in the way, but he accelerated hard towards the barrier.
And what was the reaction of the police at that point? What did you see?
Well, the police were very fast. They vaulted over the safety barrier and head towards the car, followed by obviously lots of armed police who were in the area. What also happened was the police started to do a cordon. Not only did police come towards us, the police actually headed away to try and block off people walking towards us.
And what about the car? We saw video of armed officers encircling that vehicle.
Well, it's strange. When it hit the barrier, of course, there was a lot of smoke, and it hit it with quite a jar. It actually came off the ground and landed again, because it's quite a light car. But we're not sure. They rushed to the scene, grabbed the bloke, but then they seemed to walk away.
And what about you? What did you do?
Well, obviously we were pushed back. After the police first got to the car, they then turned around and started to push us back towards where the lights were. And that's when I walked past and saw lots of pedestrians and standing there, but also the cyclists. There was a few on the ground. Some were holding their arms, but there was bikes everywhere.
And what about at the moment of the collision? Presumably, given events here in Westminster in the last year or two, a frightening moment.
Well, it was frightening, but that's why I was walking backwards, not actually standing too close to the car. You never sure what's in the car.
And there's a scene on the ground. The cyclists. Can you give us an idea of the numbers? The scene at that set of lights where the cyclists had been.
Well, there was about 10 cyclists waiting for the lights to change. I don't think he hit all of them. He hit about 4 or 5, and there was bikes everywhere. I was very impressed. One of the cyclists got up and started to chase the car.
Good heavens.
Yes. There was one laying on the ground which was being treated, and 2 or 3 were just sitting there holding their arms against posts and stuff.
And what was your sense of the motive, if there was one, behind this? Could it have been an accident?
Well, if it was very strange, because once he hit the cyclist, he accelerated. You'd have thought he would have tried to put the brakes on, but he swerved across and accelerated towards the barrier.
Unless he was trying to get away from the scene, perhaps?
He was a very bad driver then.
And as someone who's worked in Westminster for a long time, you would of course have been around during the Westminster Bridge attack last year. What was going through your mind when you saw this incident?
Well, it looked like an attack. It was a fairly feeble one because it was a small car, but it did look deliberately to drive out the barrier.
And the reaction of the police at that point, I mean, obviously this area has an awful lot of armed police at all times, and it does appear that they responded very quickly and in numbers.
They did, and also it seemed well rehearsed. As I said, police ran towards the car, but also some ran away to actually stop people walking towards where the car was.
Well, that was Barry Williams, an eyewitness to what happened here at Westminster, talking to Mark Easton, our home editor. The government's Cobra Emergencies Committee is going to be meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon to discuss what happened here. We've heard from the police already that they are treating it as a terror-related incident, and that the man they're questioning is being held on suspicion of terrorism offences. We've been hearing on behalf of the government from the Housing and Communities Secretary, James Brokenshire.
Our thoughts are with everyone who's been involved with this morning's incident, and I want to thank the emergency services for their response. This is being led by the police. The counter-terrorism police are leading the investigation for the Metropolitan Police, but they are keeping open-minded around this incident, and obviously the police will provide further updates as and when they're available.
And do you know whether it was deliberate or accidental? I understand a man's been arrested under terror offences.
The police have obviously are leading the investigation. This is an ongoing incident. I can't offer further details. What I can obviously say is the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command are leading on this. A man was detained outside of the Palace of Westminster, but the police are saying that we should keep open-minded in respect of what has occurred. But obviously our thoughts are very firmly with everyone caught up in this incident, those who have been injured, and our thoughts are very firmly with them.
That was James Brokenshire speaking on behalf of the government, the Housing and Communities Secretary. Well, the police have also been talking this morning. Let's hear from our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford, who's at New Scotland Yard. What is the picture that the police are painting for us, Daniel?
To be the worst of the casualties. Another person's been discharged from hospital, another person treated at the scene. So thankfully we're in a situation where there's been an apparent attack on Westminster, but with nobody killed and only one person apparently seriously injured, and she's not suffering from life-threatening injuries. The COBRA committee is meeting at 2 o'clock this afternoon, but it is a meeting at the level of officials only, so that means that ministers like the Home Secretary won't be attending at this stage. So that shows this is being treated as a moderately serious incident. So this is because although this was, by all accounts, an attempt to attack Parliament, it hasn't been a very successful one, and we haven't got large-scale loss of life. Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu said to us that the man who's believed to be the driver of the vehicle in his late 20s, who is in custody, they are trying to identify that man, but he is not currently cooperating. So certainly we don't have a situation where the driver has been helpful with the police and given a helpful explanation as to what has happened, and therefore police don't know what his motivation was. But we've gone from a situation where when James Brokenshire was talking, police were dealing with this incident with an open mind, to a situation where they're actually treating it as a terrorist incident. So that's their prime belief as to what the cause of this was, that this was a politically motivated attack on cyclists and pedestrians and on Parliament itself. Clearly the key thing in this investigation now is to work on the identity of that suspect, on the place where he lives and people that he knows, and also in this modern era on his social media and computer usage. And by going through his property, talking to people that he knows, and by going through all of his computer and smartphone memories, that is how police are likely to work out what was the reason why this man did deliberately drive his vehicle into Parliament, if that's indeed what he did. One other interesting thing at this early stage of the investigation, we believe that the man's vehicle actually drove down this road, down Embankment, towards Parliament before turning right onto Bridge Street and then round Parliament Square, because we've seen some footage which shows him doing that some minutes before the incident. So it looks like after that he may have done at least one loop of Parliament Square itself. We're busy trying to look at footage ourselves to just be sure about that, but it does look as if he's at least done one circuit of Parliament Square before then driving off down towards the House of Lords entrance, where his vehicle eventually smashed into the barriers there after hitting the cyclists and pedestrians. And you see police officers jumping out of the way on that footage, so he may of course have been deliberately targeting police officers as well. So it does look like he might have done a bit of a circuit and a bit of a recce as he was going into this what appears to be deliberate attack on Parliament.
And Daniel, we know that just down the road from where I am, they're doing forensic work, forensic tests at the scene where that vehicle, that silver Ford Fiesta, collided with the security barriers. And presumably they'll also be looking at all the various bits of footage, CCTV and mobile phone footage. But in the end, I guess they kind of know what happened. As you're suggesting, it's trying to find out the why rather than the what happened.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, how do you work out why it happened? First of all, did the driver say anything in the immediate aftermath? Are there eyewitnesses or the armed officers who very, very quickly responded who can give an account of anything that he said in that immediate aftermath? Because if you remember, after the Finsbury Park attack, for example, the driver of the vehicle in the Finsbury Park attack gave quite a lot of quite detailed information in the immediate aftermath of that attack. So did this driver say anything immediately in the aftermath? Has he said anything at all, although the police say he's not cooperating? Has he said anything at all while he's being held in custody at Southwark Police Station? But then if none of that produces anything, then it's all about any records that there are in his smartphone, his computers, any paper that can be found that either shows any kind of planning of this or that shows any kind of mindset, any kind of ideology that might give a clue as to the motivation. And that's the work that you can be assured be going on now. I'd be incredibly surprised if there aren't at this moment police officers searching a property somewhere in the UK and getting hold of that material now. And so often people do travel with their smartphones, whether or not this driver was, but if he was travelling with his smartphone, then of course the police will have had that already. That was certainly the case with Khalid Massoud, who carried out the Westminster Bridge attack on March the 22nd last year. His smartphone was seized almost immediately.
Daniel, many thanks indeed. That's Daniel Sanford, our Home Affairs correspondent, with the very latest from New Scotland Yard. And in terms of the casualties, well, everybody's been saying what a relief it is that the casualties have been relatively light. When the vehicle hit cyclists, there were a number of injuries. We gather 3 people treated at the scene. 1 didn't need to go to hospital, 2 were taken to hospital. 1 has been discharged since then, but 1 is still in hospital, but not with serious or in any way life-threatening injuries. And meanwhile, that man in his late 20s, according to the Metropolitan Police, still being questioned at a South London police station on suspicion of terror offences. That's the latest from here at Westminster. Back now to the studio.
My colleague Bev Brown there at Westminster. We have all the latest for you from Westminster, Central London on the website. Updates, pictures, video, clips from the police as well, who have been speaking, counter-terrorism police, all there, bbc.com/news.